Well, hello everyone. Welcome to Quantum Freedom International live stream, and we welcome all of you who's been supporting us, who've been sharing what we've been doing, and then share it to others. So whatever resonates to you, it's not about us; it's about what we share and conversation together. It's we kind of think of this like a teachable moment, so that we can all be empowered, especially of what's been happening
Can't
in the
hear you
last
guys.
few
I don't know
years.
what the hell's going on.
And so for today, we were very happy and excited to have David Edwards of getyourpma.org as our guest. And with me,
.com.
.com. So we'll check that out later, okay? Make sure. So getyourpma.com. And with me are colleagues from broadcasting truth and freedom from all over the world. I have Dr. Jayne Marquis, and I have John Capsavos, I have Hartmut Schumacher, and I have Steve. So you can check all of their different podcasts and can follow conversations, and you'll know exactly what messages they want to share with you. Okay, and so a little bit about David, because David has a lot of powerful things and messages for us. So I don't want to take up a lot of his time, but he's been in the law practice, although not a lawyer, but he's in the law practice since 1984. And he's really been teaching the protections of the private domain for over 26 years now. Now, I've always wondered before, David, like situations like how come some physicians I go to or holistic practitioners I go to, sometimes I have to sign papers of membership, sometimes I have to do like a fingerprint, and sometimes, so there's just so many things that I notice is happening. And of course, especially now that many doctors and other professionals either are losing their jobs, losing their licenses. All of this is just so crazy. Like yesterday, I know I have a someone who needs to work somewhere, and then she was a per diem in a situation, and I didn't really ask whatever is her V status, and then she couldn't get in because she didn't have that V status. So all these things is happening. So David, how about you just tell us what made you specialize in this, that private membership association?
Wow. When I spent 18 years as a cop when I was young, and at one point I thought I could do more good for the people if I were to become an attorney. So I started studying law, and I aligned myself with a man who became a mentor of mine. He was the chief judge in the federal court systems for the Southern District of Ohio, and also a highly respected law school professor at one of the law schools. So he kind of changed the course of what I thought I wanted to do when he started teaching me the things that the law school students don't get taught in law school and why they don't get taught those things. And one of those was the distinction between the separation of the domains. We use the terminology public domain and private domain, but only because that's the terminology the courts have used for over 150 years. But it's technically just a separation of jurisdictions. You have a public jurisdiction and a private jurisdiction. But one of the things that he taught me early on was if I continue through law school and become a member of the bar or become licensed by any governing authority in any state, then I wouldn't be able to do what I do now. But at that point, I would become an officer of the court. So my first obligation would be to the court. My second obligation would be to public law. And my third obligation would be to my client. So if I were drafting documents to take people out of the jurisdiction of the courts and out of the jurisdiction of public law, I would be violating my oath. But so I had to um, I had to make some decisions back then on how I wanted to proceed. Now, um, in recent years, that mindset from the courts has changed because we've had attorneys that are members of the bar standing up and telling the courts their oath says their first obligation is to the Constitution, and their second obligation is to their state constitutions. But so now I've been training some of these constitutional law firms, that or some of the personnel from these firms, but to properly draft the documents, the founding documents, to create the private associations that and the unincorporated ministries, that to for people to take their business out of the jurisdiction of public law and keep it a private contractual matter. But I realize we get people from all over the world, but the everything for the most part is based upon everything that I teach is based upon U.S. law and the protections that we're supposed to have in place with our Constitution. When I was a kid and joined the Army, I took an oath to the Constitution, and I've taken that oath many times at the police department. When I went back into the National Guard, but and early on, it was kind of frustrating to see that everybody around me had taken the same oath, but none of them had ever read or studied the Constitution. And I always said, how can you take an oath to protect and defend the Constitution if you don't even know what's in it? So I've also been teaching the Constitution for over 26 years. But going back to the separation of domains, what I started learning what's not generally taught in law school, and what most attorneys that I run into, well, it used to be most attorneys just ignored it, but as misinformation. But over the last probably 5 to 7 years, we've had an awful lot of attorneys that have started trying to study law, or studying what they're not taught, studying the separation of domains, but learning the case law going back to the 1800s. They're starting to realize that there are a lot of things out there about law that they're not taught, but and they have to make the effort to educate themselves beyond what they get in law school. And those usually end up being the attorneys that I teach to do what I do. But you have the ability to keep your business a private contractual matter between you and your members. But we have an unlimited power to contract, a right to contract, a right to private contract. But and there's the law says, and it always has, at least in this country, that no state can pass any law that impairs the obligation of contract. So as long as we keep our business a private contractual matter, but between the association and its members, or even members within the association, but it keeps that business in the private domain and outside of the authority of public law to regulate. But government entities at all levels have the authority to enforce public law, but within the public domain. They don't have the authority to regulate your private contractual obligations, your private contractual matters. With historically in this country, the biggest need for these protections has always been around the natural health care fields. When we're talking to natural health care providers, that their speech under public law is restricted, and their activities are restricted, but somewhat. We're taught that we're not supposed to use terminology like the words cure or treat or diagnose. Those are no-nos, and you have to stay away from them. However, within one of my associations is the American Natural Health Association. And within my association, I don't have those restrictions. I don't have to restrict my speech. I can use whatever terminology I want. I have that private contractual relationship. It keeps those conversations private. It's the same as if I'm sitting around my supper table talking to family members. That's a private conversation. Government cannot come into my home and regulate my conversations or restrict the speech or terminology that I use. So that's the same relationship I establish with every one of the members of my association. It's a private matter. It's private speech. You don't have the authority to come in and tell me that I can't use certain terminology. I'm going to use whatever wording I feel is most appropriate, but to convey whatever my thoughts are at the time, but within that conversation.